Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presents the Union Budget on Saturday. And today we're kicking off a three-part series on the middle class's expectations from the Union Budget. From automobiles, infrastructure, jobs and taxes. Today we are starting by talking about the modernization of India's automotive landscape. Cities are choked by pollution. Over 50% of air pollution in India's cities are caused by vehicle exhaust. India needs to accelerate the transition to clean mobility, not just for a cleaner environment, but also for public health. And today we are looking at the electric vehicles segment. Half a dozen new EV models are expected in the market this year. All the major automotive brands are in the fray, including Maruti, which plans to establish a robust EV ecosystem, including extensive charging infrastructure and service networks. All of these big players in EVs have urged Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to introduce reforms that enhance affordability, infrastructure and innovation in the sector to tackle both manufacturing and consumer-centric challenges. Will Budget 2025-26 change the EV landscape in India? Joining me on the News9 Plus Show now is Hormaz Soraji, Editor Autocar India, Dilip Chenoy, former Secretary General FICCI, and in the studio I have with me my colleague Karthik Malhotra. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus Show. Hormaz, I must start by asking you this. Incidentally, today is the 29th of January. It's the date Carl Benz patented the first gasoline-driven automobile.
Yeah, so in effect, internal combustion day, how ironic.
How ironic that we should be speaking about EVs on ICE day. But let me start by asking you this, Hormaz. We're going to see like a dozen EVs being launched this year. How do you evaluate what's on offer, and has India joined this EV game very late?
So I think, we were a low base really, but we saw some good growth last year. And I think, we've sold around 100,000, 1 lakh EVs. So penetration is still very low. It's just a little over 2%. I think that's really a function of a couple of things. One is what's turning out to be one hurdle is charging infrastructure or the lack of it. But I think a bigger dampener to growth was the lack of choice and models. You had just one player dominant, Tata Motors, which really took a very strong lead, and they're still by far the market leaders with over 62% market share.
Right.
But I think 25 is going to be exciting because for the first time, you'll see a lot of mass brands coming into this space. So you've got Maruti, which is the biggest car maker in the country, and when they come with an EV, everyone has to sit up and take notice.
Right.
You've got the second largest brand coming in, which is Hyundai with the Creta EV, and you've got Mahindra also.
Yes.
So I think fundamentally these three, and then you've got others. You've got MG, a whole bunch of them coming in. So I think with this with this new wave of EVs, I think the penetration should at least double in 2025.
Right. Penetration should double. That's very impressive. Dilip Chenoy, while we're talking about ICE Day today, we can't ignore the Trump effect. The fact is that President Donald Trump has promised to make ICE great again. He's rolled back all the the ceilings that were the targets that were given for electric vehicles in the United States. He wants automobiles and oil. What are the kind of challenges that this could present for electric vehicles globally?
I think if you look at Trump's whole scenario, which he has talked about, there are two views on it. The first view is remove the cap.
Yes.
So he, they had a 50% cap on a particular year. Now he's removed the cap. He's saying if the consumer wants more electric vehicles, then the consumer can actually go that 50% cap can be breached. But I think the other aspect which is playing on the OE's mind is the CAFE standards.
Yes.
And to meet the CAFE standards and the way the CAFE standards, the corporate average fuel efficiency standards that the fleets have to meet, electric vehicles will play an important role in that. Alternate fuel vehicles will play an important role. Some will go the hybrid way, some will go the electric way, some will go any other way. So I don't think, government policy could be one, but the way the regulation is playing out on the ground is possibly going to continue the whole focus of electric vehicles, at least in major players. And the US is one market. Europe, Japan, India, China, all are different markets. So those markets are not decelerating their approach to the EV space.
Yes, but the US is a very powerful player in all of this. I guess funds a lot of the technology that goes into these markets. But Karthik, coming to the Indian market, as Hormaz mentioned, the fact that Maruti has finally jumped into the fray. It's the biggest player, and as he said, we'll have to set up and take notice of the kind of investments that they plan to roll out in the EV sector. Just give us an idea how significant this is, and does this mean that the consumer has much more now to choose from? This is a company that stayed away from EVs for the longest
You're
time.
right. In fact, I think Sandeep, hey, thanks for having me on the show. I think I'm sitting in August company. But in my view, it is a milestone and
Yes.
a fairly momentous milestone that now you have India's largest car manufacturer getting into the EV space. Thankfully, Maruti has been able to live up to its deadline, and it promised it's going to launch an EV in 2025.
Yes.
Here it is. It has revealed the e-Vitara. It has launched it at the
Yes.
Auto Expo that just concluded last week. But to my mind, this entire EV transition is primarily going to be led, and
Yes.
these are early trends that we are seeing already. The EV transition will be led primarily by the large buses. That is something which is happening, and that is where players like JBM, etc., are very active.
Yes.
Then there is the two-wheeler market, and with the likes of Ola Electric and the likes of Bajaj Auto now really doubling down on EVs.
Yes.
This is the second lever which is going to move to electrification of India's road transport.
Right.
Coming to cars, 100%, no doubt. Maruti, Suzuki coming in, Hyundai coming in with the Creta EV,
Yes.
so many models by MG, and now Mahindra and Mahindra jumping into the fray. Yes, the whole landscape has widened, and there is more choice available.
Right.
Interestingly, I think it's a good day to have this discussion because Maruti Suzuki's Q3 results just came out a few hours ago,
Right.
and you're seeing a 20% rise in utility vehicles. So the MUV, SUV segment has grown in volumes by about 20%, and Maruti Suzuki for Q3 has recorded a net profit of about 16% rise year on year at about 3,800 crore rupees or so.
Right.
So you know that the consumer is moving towards bigger vehicles, and these bigger vehicles, if they come at the price point with which, let's say, the Creta has been launched, which is fairly lucrative, if you're able to give the consumer that option between opting for an ICE engine where your petrol bills are likely to rise year on year,
Yes.
and an EV available at just a slight increase, not a great price difference, the delta needs to be really contained.
Yes.
I think consumers will willy-nilly opt for electric vehicles, and the big important but in that is that you've got to have much better charging infrastructure. Maruti is saying it's
Right.
going to give charging infrastructure at its dealerships, and it's going to launch, I think, 100 charging stations
Yes.
in the in a few states, etc. But these numbers are still small. So you need private investment going into
Yes.
building EV charging infrastructure, the kind that Tesla has done in the US. So
Right.
you really need either auto companies or other companies, battery manufacturers, etc., to go ahead and really double down on the EV charging infrastructure. And that is one hope that I have pinned on the budget, that if the government is really serious about
Yes.
the 30% consumer vehicles, passenger vehicles to be electric by the year 2030, then I think the post-sale, which is the charging infrastructure or the battery swap, etc., these will have to be incentivized in the budget this year.
Have to be incentivized indeed. And this, 30 by 2030, Hormaz, that's a target that the government has rolled out. You believe we are in sight of achieving that? Just five years to go, and the numbers don't look very, the numbers for EV penetration in India don't look very encouraging. But do you believe these new incentives could kind of incentivize EVs?
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I think 2030. I think globally also. I think the level of EV penetration people were expecting. I think it's going to be a long transition.
Right.
I think we've seen the reasons for that. Fundamentally, it's charging infrastructure. Just until you have the same convenience of charging your vehicle like you do, or filling your vehicle, there will always be this sort of hurdle. But I think I think India is going to accelerate its EV penetration a lot in the next couple of years. I think 25 to 27, we are going to see a huge amount of EV products coming in, and I think it's largely because what was said earlier, that we have to meet CAFE standards. The
Yes.
CAFE standards in India are going to get even tougher by 27. By 28, I think I think by then 27, 28 is going to be the year that the new standard will kick in. It will force OEMs to go, towards EVs. And I think that's one of the reasons why Mahindra, which is really got these big diesel engines, they
Yes.
know they have to offset that emission with the EVs. So I think EVs will accelerate, but I still think, my guess is I don't see penetration going more than 15 to 18% by 2030 still.
Yeah, just 15%, just half of that target. But even that,
Yeah.
double-digit thing is very impressive. But Dilip Chan, I want to ask you this about the center schemes, like the FAME, PLI Auto, ACC. There's a whole alphabet soup of government-run schemes to promote electric vehicles in India. What more can the government really do to incentivize electric vehicles in India? Like the way, for instance, how China has done. The Chinese EVs today are leading the world. What can India learn from the Chinese example?
Yeah, so you talked about the alphabet soup that there is.
Yes.
The challenge is that it is very difficult. The ease of utilizing those subsidies,
Yes.
because of the complexity of the way that you have to align and the data that you have to give and the information that you have to give, and the recent challenge in the two-wheeler space. This has actually made a lot of companies wary of going in for these standards. Even if you look at the dispersion in the PLI scheme, it has been a challenge. So I think the first thing is, how can the government make the ease of compliance to all of these schemes better, faster, transparent before announcing any other scheme, right? The second is really, like Karthik mentioned, focus on the buses. Unfortunately, the buses have all gone in for fixed charging, and he, towards the end of his conversation, he mentioned battery swapping, right? So you can actually, with battery swapping, you can reduce or eliminate the incentive that is required in buses and trucks, etc., and get the last mile owner. People forget that the State Road Transport Corporation or the big fleet owners are not the largest owners of trucks and buses in the ecosystem. How do you make it viable for a single truck or a two truck or a two bus or three bus operator actually to transition into EV at the least possible cost and make a profit? So you'll have to actually look at that also, which is not there in the current scheme of things. So the consumer incentive is actually geared towards State Road Transport Corporations, large fleets, etc. What you might see, which will happen, and you started off the discussion on environment.
Yes.
If you go back to the history of CNG, once when multiple models were available, many cities and state governments actually said only CNG commercial vehicles will be allowed to ply. I don't know if that story is going to be repeated, but there's a high probability given from what we're hearing in Maharashtra and some of the states talking about. So I think make the incentives easy to comply with and obtain, and also look at extending them to specific areas and specific things rather than spreading it over the whole ecosystem. Focus it on specific cities and geographies linked to, let's say, pollution level or linked to consumption level, etc.
Absolutely, that's a great suggestion there. Linking it to specific cities, Karthik, Delhi and Mumbai, we've been seeing record levels of pollution. And this point that Dilip made about ease of compliance as well. What do you see in the union budget coming out, Karthik, this time? Is there something very specific that the government will bring out, given the fact that you literally have the Chinese EV makers breathing down our necks?
Right. So, Sandeep, I believe number one, like I mentioned already, charging infrastructure should be the top priority of the government from a budget perspective. See, unfortunately or fortunately, as the case may be, with the introduction of GST, budget is not the moment to really arrive at kya kitna mehnga hua, kya kitna sasta hua, right? So GST has taken that joy of the budget away to some extent. That's why I said unfortunately. But I believe, already you have just a 5% GST on EVs. Future GST Council meets could incentivize it, make it even sweeter, maybe bring it down to a special category of 2%, 3%, maybe waive it off altogether. You already have pretty much every state in which the government has advised those states not to charge the road tax. So you're trying to make it more conducive for people to buy the electric vehicle. But my biggest fear really is, and I'm not sure if the budget will be able to offset that or not. See, environmental concerns, pollution, all of that, tailpipe emissions, CAFE norms, all that is one part of the story. Primarily, the challenge that India is facing is a high import bill.
Yes.
So you want to actually reduce your oil imports and go for an
Right.
option where your oil imports don't pinch you as much,
Yes.
even if oil prices
world's
go
second
up
largest,
over. Right.
oil
But what
importer,
I'm
yes.
seeing play out right now in the market, especially with Trump coming in and Trump saying, drill,
Yes.
baby, drill, and I'm going to export oil and I'm
Yes.
going to put pressure on
Yes.
OPEC to cut oil prices. I have a feeling that over time, if EV penetration reaches globally an inflection point,
Yes.
that there's a huge volume of electric vehicles
The
being
oil
sold.
prices will crash.
No,
Yes.
I believe that the oil prices will actually come down,
Yes.
but China will be able to very comfortably raise the prices of the lithium-ion batteries.
Oh,
So
right.
your import bill will continue to be high. It's just that you're importing
It's-
something else. You're importing batteries from China,
Yes.
and that's a fillip for Chinese economy,
Right.
and you're not importing as much oil, even though oil is cheaper.
It's a conundrum.
So
indeed.
should the government actually look at import duties on oil, on petrol,
Yes.
which is outside of the GST?
Right.
And should there be some tinkering there to either incentivize or disincentivize ICE vehicles is something that perhaps Finance Minister could consider.
Absolutely, and we'll know in a few days from now. Thank you very much for joining us, Dilip Chenoy, Hormaz Sorabji, and of course my colleague Karthik Malhotra.
Thanks, Adit.